I think they got as close as you could possibly get because the NBA is, as much as it is about stats and numbers that you can't deny, there's also a level of subjectivity and narrative that plays a big role in whether or not players get thought of as Hall of Famers, as greatest of all time conversation. And I think they did a really serviceable job of adding some of the truly talented difference makers over the last 25 years.
Let me put you on game.
The NBA, with the 75th anniversary of the actual organization and the association, announced their 75th anniversary team. And this comes 25 years after the 50th anniversary team, which included 50 players. So they've kept their original 50 and then added another 25 to make it 75. And there's been a whole lot of debate online about who was left off and who should have been on and who should have been left off and all of these other conversations surrounding players and greatness. As of course, you know, the NBA is always good for a debate. But the notable additions, we're going to go ahead and go through them for those that aren't familiar. It kind of helps us contextualize the list. We've got Ray Allen, Giannis, Carmelo, Kobe, Steph, AD, Tim Duncan, KD, Kevin Garnett, James Harden, LeBron, J. Kidd, AI, Kawhi, Dame, Bob McAdoo, Reggie Miller, Steve Nash, Dirk, CP3, Gary Payton, Paul Pierce, Dennis Rodman, D. Wade, Russell Westbrook, and Dominique Wilkins as the new additions to the team. So, how are you feeling about the list overall? Like, do you think, like, how close do you think they got to getting it right?
I think they got as close as you could possibly get because the NBA is, as much as it is about stats and numbers that you can't deny, there's also a level of subjectivity and narrative that plays a big role in whether or not players get thought of as Hall of Famers, as greatest of all time conversation. And I think they did a really serviceable job of adding some of the truly talented difference makers over the last 25 years. I mean, you got Ray Allen, one of the greatest shooters of all time. You got Giannis, the Greek freak. Kobe, obviously. Steph changed the game. The big ticket and Kevin Garnett and the big fundamental and Tim Duncan. We were just looking at Bob McAdoo. He didn't make the original list 25 years ago, but when you look at his numbers, the scoring titles, the NBA championships, go look up this man, Bob McAdoo.
He was getting buckets for like that 7-8 year stretch of his career. He was a nightmare statistically. So yeah, I was about to say, man, I don't know about Bob McAdoo, but like now I know about Bob McAdoo. So
yeah, you know, you got the two-way monster in Kawhi, Allen Iverson with the crossover, the originator with the braids and the tattoos and the baggy jeans and the talking about practice. Like you guys, there's legends who got picked up here. Russell Westbrook averaging a triple-double for God knows how many seasons now, eclipsing the Big O and Oscar Robinson. You know, and then they added Dominique Wilkins, the human highlight reel. So I think overall they got it right. Of course, I think there's some omissions that we're going to get into, but this list, you're talking about legendary status for a lot of these guys that were innovators in one way or another, guys that did things that no one else could do.
Of course, yeah, there's so much talent across the history of the NBA. And I think right now it's going to get even tougher when they do the top 100 because there's so much. I think the league has the most talent it's ever had, like right now, like team per team and player per player. So it'll be tough. The list, I think I'm okay with. It's a list. Like I can never bring myself to get all riled up over. So like a list that I have nothing to do with. But yeah, I think my impressions of it, especially after we went over it pre-podcast and we looked at who actually got added and the fact that they kept the original 50, my argument is going to be like, yo, when you get to the top 100, you might want to move some of the players from the top 50 off. Because, I mean, I know that they're NBA legends and I know that, you know, some of them are no longer with us. So, like, there's that and the respect to their families and et cetera, et cetera. But, like, the league is changing so fast and there's so many good players that I don't necessarily think that it's the best idea to have certain players on there. Like, I'm not going to name any names, but I think that there might be some guys that you could possibly take off. But looking at the list of players that were added and looking at some players that have made their mark since the top 50 was announced, who do you think are some notable omissions?
Yeah,
Give
I
me your
mean
first notable admission, and I'll give you my next one.
um I think Nikola Jokic is a really big omission. He's not the biggest omission in my eyes, but he got an MVP. And most of the time, MVPs make these lists, as well as the stats that he has prior to his MVP years. He's been getting better year over year and has been excellent for at least the last 3 years. And it is a short sample, but he's a really great player with an MVP to boot, and he's not on the list. And that's a pretty big omission in my eyes. How about you?
Uh, it's been probably the biggest omission that people have been talking about, and it's somewhat controversial because of the personality of this person, but it's
I know who you're
Dwight.
gonna say. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Dwight. Um, yeah, it definitely feels like more of a vote on his likability than his actual talent, because there was a time where Dwight was the most likable player in the NBA, especially like, Superman dunk contest time. Like he was
Yeah.
definitely like commercial gold. But his stops post Orlando, especially with his exit from Orlando, and his time in Houston and Charlotte and Atlanta, and him not necessarily being liked by teammates and all, like saying and doing questionable things in the media, like it's put a stain on his perception. But if you want to take away the uh, perception of Dwight and actually just look at his stats and his accomplishments, like 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, 8-time All-Star, 5-time All Defensive Player. He was the best center in the league for at least half a decade, and the stats really just point to him. And his team won. They never won the big championship, but his team was actually like a perennial top seed while he was in his prime. So it's tough, but yeah, I think Dwight would have to be one that I think you have to give a serious consideration to.
Yeah, I definitely echo those sentiments, and I really can't blame you for that. Some other guys that I felt like are kind of People's Choice Awards is obviously T Mac. We all grew up loving Tracy McGrady and his game.
He
Him
would have
as
been if he
the
didn't get hurt. Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
yeah. If he didn't get hurt, if he would have somehow gotten the Magic past the first round during all those years in Orlando and gotten Houston over the hump, he would be legendary status because his game, 13 points in 40 something seconds, and just his overall aesthetic. He was so much fun to watch, especially when I was growing up. As well as guys like Vince Carter. I think Carter is not being as great as everyone expected him to be. Everybody really kind of pegged him to be the next Jordan with his high flying antics, but his game never really translated his team to tangible victories. You know what I mean?
Still had a
And
great
then
career though.
yeah. Anybody else on the notable omissions list for you?
Uh, Couple honorable mentions. I will name some names. We don't duck on this podcast. So Bill Walton. I don't know if you can put him over a guy like Pau Gasol. I think
Mm,
Bill Walton had a championship early in his career, but he only really had, I want to say, like 3 good seasons, maybe
mm,
4 before he got hurt. And then he was a role player basically for the rest of his career, got some rings with the Celtics. But I think that Powell was more consistent over his career and actually
yeah,
was like the second best player on 2 championship teams. So,
yeah,
I mean, he's not going to make the list. But I mean, hometown hero, Derrick Rose, MVP, has a good overall NBA career cut short by injury, kind of in the same vein as like a T Mac, maybe lesser
yeah,
so with a shorter prime. Manu Ginobili, not gonna make a list, but honorable mention. Tony Parker, Luka Doncic, because of the Shaq pick. They picked Shaq with only like 1 or 2 years in his career on the top 50 list because he was just that dominant. But
yeah,
Luka potentially could have that level of dominance, so I would consider putting him on there along with a guy like Jokic. And one big snub I think would have to be Klay.
yeah,
Uh, 3-time NBA champion, 5-time All Star, uh, top 5, maybe top 2, depending on who you're talking to, jump shooter of all time. Uh, yeah, just an elite player, elite defensive player as well, underrated defender. But I think he has an argument over some people on the list. But I mean,
yeah,
it's a list, so naturally it's not gonna. I think, like you said, I think they got as close as they could to getting it right. But
yeah,
yeah, any other thoughts on the list before we move on?
yeah. I think that had Klay not gotten injured, they might have won that championship in 2019 against the Raptors, and
That
he
would
would
make
have
4.
kept playing. That would have made 4, and he would have kept playing over these last 2 seasons, and that would have disqualified a guy like Dame at being on this list.
Right.
But because of recency bias, Dame has been dazzling us over the last 2 years with some incredible logo threes and has just been a force to be reckoned with. So they said, hey, we got to add this dude. Anthony Davis, I think, is a bit premature. Yeah, he got his championship, but I think Dwight has the overall better resume and has been healthier for the length of his career.
So does Powell as well, I would argue. I think AD is more statistically impressive, but I think Powell's career gives him the edge for now.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, overall, this list is really some amazing players. First overall draft picks galore that have lived up to and beyond their luster, and their draft picking. So we're talking about the greats, so there's always going to be some kind of debate.
Yeah, it's all subjective, like you said.